Good evening and welcome to Beyond the Front Page, a public affairs show brought to you by Q Community College for the spring 2021 season here at the college. This is a show that is put on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, as well as ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, as well as the college's radio station 89.1. I'm your host, Guy Cosentino. Our guest today is Port Byron Central School Superintendent Neil O'Brien, who's been with that district since 2004, and at the end of this June he will be retiring after roughly 17 years. He has a degree from St. John Fisher, and he worked for Xerox for a bit of time before he became a social studies teacher, beginning his administrative career in 1994. We've asked him to come in. I think he is the most senior member of the superintendents right now.
That's a nice way of saying it.
We'll call you the dean of that. The former head of the New York State Council of School Superintendents. And as I said, you're going to be departing your job at the end of June. But we've asked you to talk about a little bit about your career, but what's going on in Port Byron and just education in general. So welcome. Welcome back.
I'm excited to be back.
So for the basics, for people who may not know about Port Byron, you're a smaller school district. About how many students do you have?
We have a little over 800, and just for numbers of reasons, we had about 1,100 when I first started. So it just tells you how enrollment has slid over the time, the 17 years I've been here.
And you've made changes dealing with that demographic change. So for example, you're making a change in your upcoming budget for next year because demographics have changed. Why?
Well, it's the bigger county issue, and that's, we're going into our third census, and I assume the data will come back that our population dropped again, and that is, and we get older, right. And so that combination does not lend itself to regeneration, and so our population is falling, both in total terms, but also in student population in the county and schools, and so, over those years we've had to continually make adjustments because an 800 school district is a lot different than an 1,100 school district.
But some would almost say that you're an anomaly in the sense that you're reducing management where most, even when they have shrinking demographics, tend to add.
Well, so that's part of the magic. So about a decade ago, we noticed, from Jim Mormon, we noticed that
County Treasurer,
and we noticed that we had a really high level of people not paying their property taxes and going to the county tax bill and so forth. And so the school board, this is before the Governor Cuomo and the tax cap and so forth, my own school board sat down and said, we just can't use the tax levy anymore. We can't. We've reached saturation point. The tax per 1,000 was the point where our residents just couldn't go any farther. So we started a system where we were going to live on state aid. And so we were going to change the operations of the school district, and we were going to change how we did business to live within a budget that pretty much is dependent on state aid. And so we've left, like this upcoming year, our tax levy could go up 4% on the tax cap. We'll be 1.2% again. We're 1.2 every year, regardless of how much money we're allowed to do, we never go above that. And so our true tax rate actually has fallen over the last decade.
So in that particular, I want to be linear here of some note, how did you make out in the governor's budget this year? I know 3 school districts were reduced in Q County. You were not one of them.
We're not one of them.
What's your increase?
I can't remember off the top of my head, and to be honest with you, there's the numbers that come out for us in January tend not to be accurate. Part of what we do budgeting is that in the 4th quarter of every year, we purposely try to create some flexibility within our budget, and if we're doing well, we go out and buy technology and items like that which are aidable through BOCES, and we buy them in the 4th quarter. Often, and you get aid on that, you get aid the following year, which would be this year. Often when the governor does his runs, those purchases aren't incorporated in there. So often, like, the paper will call up and go, oh, Neil, what an awful year it is. Because often there's $300,000 or $400,000 of school aid that's not part of the runs that come out in January. So we always, I always smile a little bit. My colleagues sometimes are like, oh, you got hammered. It looks awful this year. But deep down, I know the metrics behind it, and that when April comes around and they do the final run, in which they take the late purchases we made the previous year, we'll jump up a little bit higher. Now, obviously, this year is crazy with the stimulus money and so forth, so it'll be different.
So we'll talk about stimulus money in a second, but you mentioned technology. So I have a very good friend who has 2 children in your district. They think the world of you, and what they were most impressed with was a year ago this week, roughly this week.
Yeah.
They got the notice that they weren't going back to school on the following Monday, but they had the technology in place for, at that time, I think it would have been a kindergartner and a second grader to go remote.
So you know, part of my NISCUS, years ago I was president of all the superintendents in New York State. And so I traveled a lot, which I'm thankful the district allowed me to do that. But I met colleagues throughout the state, and I learned so much going outside. So I was actually in New York City schools about 7 years ago in a school building that was similar to ours, had a different racial makeup, but economically and backgrounds very similar. And they were using technology in a way that just blew my mind, in the sense that they were able to engage students in a way that we just couldn't in the traditional brick and mortar. They were doing 21st century learning. We were doing 20th century here. And so I was so excited. I came back, told my school board. I took a group of teachers. We flew down to New York, a business trip. How often do teachers get to go on a business trip? We went down there, and I had a group of teachers there, and they were like, this is amazing. This is so forth. So we started, I think, in 2014 on one-on-ones. And so by the time you got to last March, all my kids had computers. And so on March 4th of last year, which is my wife's birthday, that's how I remember it so well, I pulled all my administrators together and said, you know, I'm reading the Wall Street Journal, the Times, we're reading everything. We're going to go out. It's coming. I mean, it's like a tsunami.
At some point, it seemed inevitable.
Inevitable. So we then sat down and said, okay, and I picked March 13th, which actually was the magical day. So a week from Friday will be our last day. Now, for the audience, I cannot pick anything successfully. My March Madness pool will be the joke of the school district. So this time I got lucky. I picked the right day. And so we just took that day and we just spun. We just really pivoted. We had the equipment, but then we had to actually go through the next process. What is it to teach remotely, and how we're going to actually teach all the kids remotely. The amazing part is we were able to compress everything, and we actually taught kids on March 16th. We were 100% online, including our UPK kids. Our teachers were teaching online the first day.
So did you do online from then till the end of June?
Yes. Yes.
And then in September, you went back, and you have some space, which is helpful.
Which is helpful, but we also, again, so
but you went back full-time.
Went back full-time.
5 days a week.
5 days a week. But that's also because the teachers are so phenomenally talented and have so much support that they could do something remarkable. So we went in the summer, we said, how could we ever have all the kids back? And so first of all, we went to our parents and said, okay, in order for us to do this, we'd have to have a certain, pretty robust amount of parents choose to drive their kids to school, because we could not bus like we have in the
Busing
best.
is an issue for all districts
so
because you've got a 6-foot minimum.
Yeah.
And
You can only do like, you could do about
20.
20 if you have relatives. I mean, that's the other thing. If your brother's with you, you're sitting with them on the bus, even if you don't like them. You're going to sit next to them.
Which is often the case. Right?
I know. So
they stepped up.
They stepped up. So once we were able to get the numeracy, so we took a physical plan to the building and said, if we use the gym as a classroom, every nook and cranny, could we hold?
You hauled stuff out of the schools to make space.
Oh yeah, we have.
You rented Verdi
containers, yep, and stripped the building, and so we got to the point where physically we could do it. Staffing wise, we were real close. But then we had some parents who wanted remote instruction, and that brought the population down.
So of your number, roughly how much is a percentage?
About
not real number.
20% are remote.
150, around that.
Yeah, around that mark. Yeah. So if that had not happened, we would have struggled mightily to teach all of our kids in the building. But that took the pressure off the building and gave us some leeway to do things. But the technology plays a large role. So when we built our schedule, which is very unique to everybody, we don't have the kids move. Now we are going to do that after the spring recess. But up to this point, students never move. They come, they go into their pod, they all have their Chromebooks, there's a smart board in the room, and we try to group kids based on their common schedules. So if you're a 10th grader, you're in a 10th grade class, and you mostly have the same classes. And so
my little friends, Thomas and Ryan, they stay in their classrooms. And they're not, what do they do for lunch and specials?
The lunches come to them. So
okay.
Lunches
what about
come
specials if you?
So they're in elementary. They're actually having phys ed.
Okay.
But in the high school, really isn't much electives. I mean, that's what you had to give up in order to do 5 days a week, and also be cognizant what the virus does, because what we didn't want is the quarantines. And so up to about December, we had almost no quarantines.
So you only had a couple of spots, and I know there was a time period in January that Aileen McNabb-Coleman and Kathleen Cuddy asked all the districts, but most of you were ahead of that curve, saying you were not going to go back until after
Yeah.
January 20th, because you wanted to get through that
Holiday.
Thanksgiving and Christmas surge, correct?
Yeah, and we had our first major outbreak in December, and we had another major one. And we sadly had a staff member pass away about a month and a half ago now. But throughout the year, if you take the totality, we had 2 dark moments where we had to have a tremendous. We shut down. We went to remote. Otherwise, though, like this fall, we were amazing. I mean, we went all the way to literally December 1st with like 3 or 4 quarantines because our schedule didn't force quarantines, because we didn't have kids mixing, we didn't have sports, we had kids go to their
And you're
pubs.
not doing any sports right now, where some districts are doing,
Yeah.
they can do up to, I'm going to say 3 seasons, but it's the old fall, the winter, and the spring,
And fall 2 now, yeah.
and fall 2. You're doing none of that.
Doing none of it, and I'll be honest with you, that was hard the last 4 or 5 weeks, and we're excited to do spring sports. I mean, you know, when you do these decision points, you do it on the data that's there, and we have a unique thing where we have school 5 days a week. But you know, if you said in hindsight, if you could do things differently, sports is one of them, and I regret at this point we don't have sports.
But a parent sent a question for another guest a couple of weeks ago, and they said, listen, the priority is get them in school. Sports, it's important, and this person said they have a child who plays sports.
Yeah.
But if their choice, and they're in a district where they're remote, so you can figure out where that is.
Yeah.
Their theory was, I got to get my kid back in school for academics. Sports is important, but if I had to have my superintendent spending time on anything, how do I open the doors?
Well, and I'll give my parents great credit. Some were frustrated, but you didn't see them in the paper, because the great Faustian deal here, the deal with the devil, is, hey, we have school 5 days a week and normalcy, or not. And so in some ways, my parents in general understood that that was the cost of doing what we were doing. That was a remarkable feat to be able to have school 5 days a week and try to keep quarantines down to a minimum. So if you're a working parent, we've been the dream school district.
Right.
For much of the year, I can guarantee you custodial care of your child, which for many working parents is what they really wanted in the summertime, is give us some sense of normalcy in an abnormal time.
Has that had some parents moved into the district?
We have tuition-paying students, and I spend an inordinate amount of time trying to figure out who really does belong at Port Byron, which is kind of a nice bookend to 15, 16 years ago, where I begged them to stay sometimes, and now I have to give them the bad news, fight them off and say, you have to live here.
So for you, as a superintendent, what's been the biggest challenge of COVID?
Trying to make it interesting for the kids. You know, if you're going to do this system, and especially in the secondary level, and you're going to spend every moment in the same classroom, boy, that's a challenge. And I got to tell you, like, we have no discipline, which I thought we would. I thought, I'm frustrated. I'm sitting in the same room every day.
Act-outs.
We have no discipline, almost 0. What happened was interesting. The relationship between student and teacher went to a different level. These are secondary teachers who traditionally would have 5 separate classes all day long, or 6 classes. Now they spent the whole day with the same kids. They evolved into sort of an elementary teacher in their relationship with the kids. There's a bond now that's amazing in those rooms, because they eat lunch together, they spend time together all day long. I mean, never in your thinking as a 10th grade teacher, I was ever going to spend all day with the same kids, like a kindergarten class.
Do you see this going into the fall and beyond, or do you think we get back to some, and I'll get to vaccines in a moment, but with herd immunity or vaccines, do you think you go back to a system where that 10th grade teacher is going to be teaching 60 different students?
We're going to do that in 2 weeks.
You're going to go.
So what we did we tried our hardest throughout the year to try to make it interesting for kids and try to do some things. So we have foosball tables, we have ping pong tables, we have a Nintendo room, or whatever, the Xbox room. So kids have breaks in the day.
Doesn't matter if you play it, as long as they can.
And so we've tried. We have a coffee bar at school, and so they can order by using an app, and we deliver it to the room. And you'd say, well, that's extreme. But what you're trying to do, and we introduced that in January, what you tried all year long, and I have a great high school principal, assistant principal, along with staff, is what can you do to give novelty, to keep moving forward? Because if you did all your bag of tricks in September, this would be getting really old. It's getting old, but the kids have been remarkable. And I'll ask the kids, you know, I asked one of my favorite students, I said in November, I said, hey, where are we? I mean, would you rather be remote, this? And she said, and it was amazing, she goes, Mr. Bryan, when we went out in March, I did the snow days dance. I thought this was the greatest thing in the world. We're gonna have snow day every day. She said, by May, I realized it was the most miserable experience of my life. And now in the fall, this was last fall, she said, as long as you keep the doors open 5 days a week and I can go to school and see my friends, even just my friends in the pod, and have some degree of normalcy, I'll take that anytime over sitting at home.
You mentioned the app. I know you have, and we've had this discussion, not here, we've had other discussions, I think though a couple years ago, we've talked about this whole issue of connectivity and the challenge. Now we talked about the first part, which is you had Chromebooks and whatnot that you were ready to go out with on March 16th. That's one piece, where districts, whether they're prepared or not on that. The other one is, we have lousy internet service in this rural area. How is it for a school district like Port Barn, and what are the challenges still?
We've kind of narrowed it out. So a little anecdote story quickly is that years ago when the first bond went through in 2014, when Governor Cuomo, that was part of the election, there was a very famous moment. I've worked with everybody in Albany, so I know everybody. So I was sitting there with the group, with the bond group, and the broadband.
This was an education bond to
broadband, no, but it was broadband for everybody.
everywhere.
Yeah. And so I was sitting with the group, and one of those sidebar conversations somewhere in Albany, and I said, you know, we're one of those areas that's desperate. And I said, but you know, financially, none of the companies are ever going to go 50-50, because that's what the governor kept walking around. We'll do a 50-50 partnership. Well, there's only 2 homes on a rural road. There's no there's no way. So the guy winked, or gal winked at me and said, we could go as high as 80, 85. And so I went back to TDS and called them, and it was hilarious. I called them over and over again. And I'll never forget, I was actually in the Hilton in downtown Albany before going to a meeting, and my phone rang, and it was the vice president of TDS, and he's like, why are you annoying us? You're a school superintendent, why are you annoying me? And I said, because you need to put in for this grant. And he says, there's no way. We got, you know, he was a little bit of arrogance, but I get it. He goes, you know, we're for profit. You know, we're not one of those non-for-profit agencies. And I said, well, you can make money here. And he goes, I can't make money on 50-50. I said, they'll do 80-20. Oh, we can make profits. And so I was like the matchmaker. I said, if I can get you somebody who will say 80-20, will you think about filling out a grant? And they actually were the largest recipient of the first grants, TDS, if you remember. And so they put in the grant. So my TDS, which is about half my district, maybe about half of it, has pretty good broadband. It's expensive though, but it has broadband. And then on my southern end, I have both Fios and Spectrum, and some spots of Spectrum. So good 80% of my district is wired, which is a surprise for a rural district.
Right.
Then we used a bus last year in emergency. This year, we really honed in the towers, and so we got Verizon, and believe it or not, AT&T for speed is better than Verizon right now, at least in our area. Even though Verizon might have better coverage, the speed of the broadband is better on AT&T. So we have both sets of cards, and we literally go out to the remaining homes and try to find the card that will hit the tower the best. And so we've really got it down to a very small, I will tell you there are some parents who have to go search, go to grandma's house or something, but overall we kept working at it, and
But that has been a challenge.
Oh, it's been the #1 challenge, because the back end we're phenomenally ready for. We have the technology at the school.
So where are you on vaccinations with your staff?
Here's my plug for Kathleen and Cuddy and Nancy and everybody else. So they were phenomenal, and so we're over 95% 2 doses in our staff.
Oh, great.
They did them at our building, remember, because they were searching for places, and we were their favorite place before they've hooked up at the mall right now to go and do vaccines.
So not your staff was not resistant to
you know, in the beginning it was interesting. I think it's, and I think that's why I'm interested, is more of a larger societal issue. I think the number will continue to rise. And so in the beginning, you kind of like, I'm not sure.
But you can't mandate it.
Not mandate it, but
You make it a very good idea.
I think we're a microcosm of society as a whole. If you asked my staff in November how many were going to get vaccinated, it would be X%. Once, it's a bandwagon effect. Once everybody's like, whoa. And actually, I think it helped the scarcity because it was almost a badge of cover. Hey, I got in. I got an appointment. I mean,
I'll tell you, I'm a perfect example of that. Somebody said to me, you qualify. I'm like, I don't qualify. And at this time, I didn't think I did, but I did. I'm telling people, get vaccinated.
Yeah.
And Kathleen was the one, she said to me, I want you vaccinated because you'll tell everybody.
Yep.
And, it just, and I do.
Well,
I say go.
My mask is always something
Proudly
about
vaccinated.
Proudly vaccinated. And, I want to. And in my communication with my parents and my staff, I never talk about not getting vaccinated. I talk about it like it's a rite of passage that everybody would want to be vaccinated. You asked a question before, I'll go back into it. I think the fall, barring some type of variant that changes the projection, I think normalcy is in the fall. I think the key here is the state of New York. The governor, in his press conference, the governor of last fall loved to do a talk show every day, and he spoke differently than his policy at times because he was talking to his political audience. So he suggested that anybody could go remote, they just had to tell the school district. Now, he actually never wrote in his guidance that you had to have remote. But if the governor's promising it, sure as heck none of us are, and so forth. So the governor this time, whoever it might be, needs to put a policy and procedure in, or SED, depending on how state government's going to operate, that limits remote instruction to people who truly need to be remote. You're a fragile medical person and so forth. But this, hey, Coke or Pepsi, I think I'm going to go Pepsi this year, type of thing.
So you really need.
I think the regulation needs to be tightened tremendously.
So a twofold question on this. The first one is, as you know, the governor, because of both the nursing home issue and the sexual harassment, the legislature, quote unquote, reduced his powers. Now, whether they did or not, that's a different issue. But do you have a worry that there's not centralized messaging? Forget it's him. Forget Andrew Cuomo. Should there be central messaging from Albany dealing with these day-to-day issues or week-to-week issues of the state's response and how it directs lower government entities to respond?
Yeah, I think the second floor, which is his offices, I've been there a lot, you've probably been there too, the second floor took over everything. And it's a political operation more than anything else. And therefore, all the other agencies' needs, thoughts were lost in the political world. So that is probably, forget about the actual crisis or the whatever. The real crux of the problem has been is that a political operation has taken over all the policy decisions in the state, and inherently that means decisions are being made not on the merits of what are needs, but what is politically most pleasable to a polling data.
So on the political side and the money side, there's some federal money coming through. Do you have any idea what you're getting right now?
Yesterday's was like Christmas. I mean, the citizens, the Senator Schumer came around and he didn't have a red suit on and he doesn't have a beard, but my gosh, it was Christmas in March.
So where will your money go to?
Well, so lots of questions. I was with superintendents today, the regional superintendents. Hey, so what strings are attached? Is it a 3-year money? Is it upfront? We have these F funds, or federal funds. Are they going to be put as federal funds, which would be away from our budget? We use them. Or is it going to go into our budget through Albany and cause this incredible crisis? Because by law, we only can carry 4% over a year. And so if they dumped $2 million into Port Byron as a one shot, that just wreaks havoc to your budgeting process because by law, I can't do anything with it except for expending it. And if I expend $2 million in 1 year isolated, that is not a good balance. So I'm hoping that thoughtful people or the law from Washington will give us the ability to be thoughtful and to use the money over multiple years and not force bad decisions in a short period of time.
Do you think the money will go directly to Albany and they'll take a cut? Because that's been the criticism of the last two measures. Or do you think it'll go directly that your office will get the check?
The way this it's being sold to us, it might come directly to us. I'm not here to, that's a tough one in some ways because it depends on how it comes. If it comes as a federal grant, like we have grants all the time, that's the best thing in the world. And if provisions give us multiple years to draw it down, because then we can meet the needs of kids now, but we also can meet some of the extraordinary needs we might have in the next couple of years.
We have about 5 minutes left. I want to talk about your retirement.
Okay.
So why are you retiring? You're a young guy. Why are you leaving?
You know, in some ways, that's a really great question. Besides age, I can go. But I have a daughter, a junior in college. It's kind of timed a little bit. I always tease her my last tuition to Notre Dame will be a celebration.
At the same time?
At the same time, yeah. But, you know,
it's that Irish connection.
The Irish connection there, yeah. But I think, 17 years is a long time. And I've been blessed for 17 years. And there's a point when you start to look in the mirror and say,
you're
you know
one of the longest serving superintendents in Cuyahoga County.
Oh yeah, I'm the longest here, but in New York State, Sean O'Connor's 16 at Weedsport, and that's unusual. In New York State, the average tenure is 5 years. If you put the 700 of us, you put us in a ranking, 17 probably puts me in the top 20 in the state. So there's a point when you look at it, and then last but not least, which I take the greatest pride in, is in the last 10 years, really tried to develop a team mechanism instead of an I.
So talk about that. We talked about it on the way down as we walked across campus. You came in with an I attitude. You're leaving with a we attitude.
So
can you explain that to
well,
viewers?
I love analogies. So I came into what would be an old home that was a lot of broken parts. And so I went to go fix them. I went to go fix the plumbing. I went to do this. I went to do that. And I came to the realization or the maturation or something at some point 4 or 5 years in, realizing that I was never going to get to the promised land as Port Byron. We grew, we were getting better, but we were never really going to get there, and it was going to be ephemeral. It's going to be brief, because if it is me and I walk away, there's no organization for it type of thing. And so just started to look at it very differently. And so it was really more of a we concept, and that is to hire the best people and expect the best out of them every day. And in public sector, you can smile a little bit. That's not always the ethos in every institution.
And there are some changes being made. So your successor has been
with
chosen.
me. He's been the high school principal. He's been with us for 7 years, and he's phenomenal.
And he'll move up in
June, July
June,
1st.
July 1st. And then you bring some other staff in.
So
So you're looking at the long game.
Yeah, and that's why I would say with great pride, the success of my tenure is the fact I don't think my departure is that big a deal. Because I have a great, the team I leave behind is so talented and has a cultural to it that I think is so powerful that, I'm excited for the district, because it's not an I at all. When I depart, it's going to be a small I.
So has that been the biggest accomplishment?
I think so. I think if I measure my accomplishments, it's my departure in the sense that I leave behind a district that is on the top of the charts in a lot of great metrics, but that I have no doubt has better days still to come, and I leave behind a great team.
Anything that you wanted to do that you just couldn't get done because of either external or internal?
I have one more building project in me. My facility is phenomenal. The one last building project I always tease is I wanted to take the public library and bring it over to the school and create a community public library area, mainly because due to state financing, I could keep that library open 18 hours a day, 6 days a week, and open on Sunday, and I could make the collection, and I could take my technology, and I could have my kids in the community in the same place. That was the one last one I wanted to do. Didn't get there.
So you won't propose it before the end of the year?
No, I won't. Yeah. But that's the one last. Everything else, if you ever come to my school at this junction, if you took a picture of it in 2004, physically,
much different.
It's a beautiful facility, and everything is there.
So some superintendents retire and they go off into the sunset, and others become what I would call range riders. They, a district is in trouble in X township or V, and they become interim superintendents. What are you going to do?
Well, I always smile. I said I actually really get along well with my wife, which is not always a guarantee in life.
Well, you remembered her birthday.
So her birthday. And so I'm a sunset guy because my wife's a college professor, and she's retiring in December, so actually it's a little bit off. We want to live together, and we want the sunset part of it. But I also work for a gentleman who was similar to me, who had been in a district a long period of time, and they're not really good people to jump in and go somewhere else, because my leadership style now is really based on probably a charismatic style. I've been there 17 years. I hired 90% of the staff and everything. That's not a great skill subset to walk in and so forth. And so I don't see myself. I'm highly vested. I can't stay at 32,000 feet. And I think you have to be willing to do that, to do those type of jobs. the nature of how I like to work, I don't think my skill subset and my personality at this stage, I don't want to do it, but I don't think I would do a good job as somebody who came in and tried to do that.
So last two questions. One you started in education in 1994.
Was an administrator. I was
Administrator.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I'm looking from
Yeah,
that
yeah.
perspective.
Pre-internet, which is always puts a smile on people's face.
So pre-internet, is that the biggest change? Is that what's been the biggest change in education from your perspective, whether it's on this macro system or for Port Barn over the last 17 years?
I think the disconnect, my fear, I guess, is the same thing as the 21st century workforce is remarkably different than the 20th century, but I'm not sure that we all really understand how we're all going to have to make those shifts. I would say that the pandemic actually started to demonstrate how different we are than the 20th century. I know we're already a fifth into this century, but the whole concept of measuring work by time is still the prevailing wisdom up to a year ago. And when you talk about working remotely, you're taking time.
It's like
as
a
not to
snow globe. It's
a
just
snow
been-
globe. And so for us as educators, I still think we're tied into the paradigm of the 20th century, but our kids need a 21st century education. I think we struggle.
So is that the next challenge for the next 10 years?
I think, and also that everybody has access to 21st century careers. And so, like in this area, we were light manufacturing and so forth, and what does that mean, 21st century wages? How do we have private sector employment here that has value-added wages going forward is, to me, the critical area for all of us, to find that solution. And I don't have the roadmap, but I think that's the struggle that we're having today that we did in '94. We were still wedded into more of a manufacturing and a time sequence.
I've been lucky enough to interview you half a dozen times or so at different venues. You've got that vision at
Thank you.
32,000, and I think your district's going to really miss you come June. But we wish you well.
Thank you very
And
much.
our guest has been Neil O'Brien, the Superintendent of Schools for the Port Barn Central School District. He is leaving after 17 years leading that community, and we do wish him well on the new front, and hope you and your wife get to spend lots of time together over the
I
next.
look forward to it.
And also now that you've got your Notre Dame bills paid.
Oh yeah, I know, that's the most
Hopefully
important
that-
thing.
Exactly. We'll be back on Tuesday with City Manager Jeff Digert to give a city update, including a discussion of the city's new agreement with the Double Days, the city's response to COVID-19, and preparations they are doing for their 2021-22 budget that goes into effect, like many municipalities, on July 1st. Next Thursday, on the 25th, we will have Seneca Community Action Agency's Director of Family and Services, Frank Barwinczak, to discuss the unfortunate spike in local domestic violence incidents. And we have a number of guests coming in the next couple of weeks that we want to just remind you of. Assemblyman John Lamondis will be here, as well as Auburn Superintendent of Schools Jeff Perazzola will give his annual budget update before their budget vote in May. David Pappert of the Healing Fields Project will be in to discuss the event they're doing in May at Hoops Park to support Operation Gratitude. And we'll have Bob Oman, who is the new operator of the Double Days this summer at Falcon Park. We'll be doing our normal Zoom forum. Well, it won't be, Zoom is not normal, but the forum for the Auburn Large School District on April 27th. I'll be moderating, and as usual, the Citizens Executive Editor, Jeremy Boyer, will also be asking the questions. Before we go, though, we would like to let you know that you can send us your thoughts for our questions or ideas for guests to Beyond the Front Page at 141 Dunning Avenue, Auburn, New York 13021, or at cozguytho@aol.com. I'm Guy Cosentino for CU Community College. We want to thank you for watching. We hope you have a good night, a great tomorrow, and be safe out there.